Okay, now we're going to do a different type of proof. We're going to use it for more, somewhat of a practical problem. For this next problem, what we want to do is we want to look at what it's saying. It's saying walking down a hallway at the mall, we notice the music store is halfway between the food court and the shoe store. So we want to draw what that looks like. And I'm going to draw, oops, let's try that again. I'm going to draw a segment. And let's put a dot there. Actually, let's make that a little bit smaller. And we'll make it a different color. So let's call this the music store. Whoops, I'm sorry. Let's call this the food court. And call this the music store. And we'll call this the shoe store. And then it says the shoe store is halfway between, oh, and I'm sorry, and we have to mark this appropriately as well. We would state that and that as well. Now it also says that the shoe store is in between the music store and the bookstore. So I'm going to have to actually extend this line out just a little bit more. And if we look carefully, it says the shoe store is halfway in between the music store and the bookstore. So I'm going to use letters that help me represent what's going on. So this shoe store is halfway in between the music store and the bookstore. So I can mark this appropriately as well. Since we know these are equal and this is already marked with one dash, we can mark this with the same dash. So therefore, we want to know, is the music store the same distance between the entrances of the shoe store and the bookstore? So the distances, again, prove that the distance between the entrances of the food court and the music store are the same as the distance between the entrances of the shoe store and the bookstore. And basically, we're proving that each of these lengths is equal. And it looks like it from our picture that that has to be true. So we're going to prove that using what's given to us. We're going to start off with FM and MS being equal, and then knowing that MS and MSB are equal, and we're going to try to prove that this distance and this distance are equal. They do it slightly different on this slide, so I'll show you what they've done. So we label it, and they labeled it basically the same way we did, and we're going to mark the figures here. We know that those two lengths are equal, and we know that those two lengths are equal, but this BC and this BC are the same thing, so it would be better to mark it with 3 markings instead. And finally, we want to state what is given and what's proved, what is to be proved, and do our proof for it. So we want to prove, then write a proof. So we know B is the midpoint of AC, we know C is the midpoint of BD, and again going back, AB and CD, we want to prove that those are equal. So we want to prove AB and CD are equal. So we go and we start out with our statements. We start with what's given to us. We know BD is the midpoint of AC, or B is the midpoint of AC, C is the midpoint of BD, and that's given to us. Then we want to take what that means. Remember, we marked our figures. So if B is the midpoint of AC, and we know AB and BC are congruent, and that's because of the definition of midpoint. We also know that BC and CD are congruent, and that's because of this line right here, or more appropriately, this line right here. The same reason, the definition of midpoint. And if you notice, AB is congruent to BC, BC is congruent to CD, so therefore the first and the last are going to be congruent as well. And our reason for this, first congruent to second, second congruent to third, that's going to be the transitive property. And finally, since we know they're congruent, we also know that they're equal, so we can rewrite that, and the reason would be the definition of congruent segments. In this example, it says, does it matter what the actual distances are in order to prove the relationship between AB and CD? In this case, no, it doesn't make a difference because we know the lengths are equal, so therefore the distances aren't important. So again, the midpoint is what's important. And finally, it says there's a clothing store halfway between the music store and the shoe store. What other two store entrances are the same distance from the entrance to the clothing store? Again, clothing store between the music store and the shoe store. So let's go back a couple. So it said that the clothing store was between the music store and the shoe store, so it would be right here. This is why the picture is really important. It's also equidistant from the food court and the bookstore in that case. So we'll go through, and it's equidistant from the food court and the bookstore. And that's it. Thanks.